The story begins mid-flight. Eric LeBlanc, a survival television host and author of an outdoor guidebook, sits beside his son Timmy on a commercial flight home. Timmy is asleep against his father's arm. Eric reads from his own book, the same guide the player will carry through the rest of the game, before the plane suddenly breaks apart in midair and goes down over a remote, densely forested peninsula. Eric survives the crash. He wakes on the ground, disoriented, in time to see a man covered head to toe in red body paint. Crouched over his unconscious son, the man lifts Timmy and walks away without a word, leaving Eric too injured to do anything but watch. Eric is the only passenger who survives. The wreckage around him is otherwise silent. The rest of the manifest already dead or scattered by whatever killed them. There's no rescue call, no signal, nothing waiting for him but the guidebook in his hands and the forest closing in on every side. The guidebook Eric carries isn't decoration, it's the game's actual survival manual. And its presence in Eric's hands from the very first cutscene ties his professional identity directly to what the player is about to be forced to do. Build shelter, start fires, forage food, and defend a perimeter using nothing but salvaged materials and whatever the peninsula offers. Eric's competence at all of this isn't explained through dialogue. It's implied entirely by the fact that a man freshly thrown from a plane crash is capable of building a working camp within his first hour on the ground, a detail that only makes sense in light of who he was before the crash. The book also tracks Eric's physical and mental state as the story continues, logging strength, stamina, and a sanity value that visibly degrades the longer he goes without rest, company, or relief from what he's seen. At low enough sanity, Eric begins building effigies, crude human figures made from sticks and bones without any prompting from the player. The game never explains this behavior through dialogue. It simply happens, an involuntary ritual performed by a mind that's been alone too long in a place actively working to break it. The peninsula isn't empty. It's occupied by tribes of feral cannibalistic inhabitants who watch Eric from the tree line before they ever attack him directly, and by a second, more deformed population the game classifies separately from the ordinary cannibals. Hulking, misshapen creatures with extra limbs, exposed musculature, and behavior patterns nothing like the tribal groups around them. Both populations treat Eric as prey from the moment they notice him, but their motivations are never given as simple hostility. Later exploration makes clear these aren't a single unified threat, so much as two different symptoms of the same underlying cause, one cultural and one biological, both traced eventually back to the same source underground. Among the mutated variety is a towering, spindly creature the game's own internal naming convention identifies as a Virginia, distinguished by extended limbs and an unsettling human resemblance beneath the deformity. It appears rarely and without warning, closer to an environmental hazard than a recurring antagonist, and its design becomes considerably more significant much later, once Eric learns exactly what kind of transformation produces something shaped like that. Throughout the early hours, Eric periodically spots the same man in red paint from a distance, always fleeing the moment he's noticed, never engaging directly. The paint isn't cosmetic, it functions as a kind of camouflage against the peninsula's other inhabitants, the mutants and cannibal tribes, giving the man in red a wide berth wherever he appears, treating him less like an intruder and more like someone who belongs here in a way Eric doesn't yet understand. These sightings accumulate slowly, more of a recurring presence than a plot beat, and for a long stretch of the story, they're the only visible thread connecting Eric to whatever took Timmy in the first place. The game gives no name to the figure yet, it only makes clear through the pattern of his appearances and the deference of the peninsula's other threats show him that he isn't simply one more thing trying to kill Eric. He's the only one moving through this place with any apparent purpose. Eventually, the caves running underneath the peninsula lead Eric toward a massive sinkhole, an opening in the earth that drops far below the surface world Eric has been surviving on. Following it down leads to something the forest itself gave no indication of concealing, a fully constructed underground research complex, abandoned, its corridors littered with the dead. This is the player's first confirmation that the peninsula's horror isn't only tribal or supernatural. Someone built something down here, and whatever happened to the people who worked in it happened suddenly enough that none of them made it out. The facility identifies itself through signage and recovered documentation as belonging to Sahara Therapeutics, a research company whose presence on the peninsula predates Eric's crash by an unclear, but evidently substantial span of time. Bodies lie where they fell throughout the complex, some torn apart, others showing signs of having turned on each other before the end. Whatever containment this place was meant to maintain clearly failed, and failed badly, long before Eric ever set foot inside of it. Recovered orientation slideshows, employee logs, and internal memos scattered through the lab fill in what Sahara's actual research involved. The company had been studying a set of ancient artifacts recovered from the peninsula, structures the documentation refers to as belonging to a group called the Ancient Ones, whose origin and identity the recovered records never clarify beyond that name. Central among these artifacts is something the lab's own paperwork calls the Resurrection Obelisk, described across multiple documents as possessing the capacity to bring the dead back to life, on the condition that a living child is sacrificed to power it. A second artifact, referred to in the documentation as the Power Obelisk, appears in a separate but related context. Internal correspondence links it directly to the ability to bring down aircraft passing near the peninsula, functioning as something between a targeting mechanism and a trap, deliberately positioned to draw fresh subjects toward the facility below. The implication, confirmed later once Eric understands the full picture, is that his own plane wasn't an accident. It was drawn down on purpose, by someone who still had access to that artifact and a specific reason to use it. Documentation scattered through the facility identifies the man in red as Dr. Matthew Cross, formerly Sahara's chief researcher on the Resurrection Project, credited by name across multiple internal orientation materials. Personal notes recovered alongside the professional documentation sketch a damning picture of Cross's home life. A restraining order filed by his wife Jessica, ordering him to stay away from her and their daughter. Threats he made that she'd regret filing for divorce, and an autopsy report showing Jessica was later murdered, stabbed and beaten, in a killing the game's own recovered documents strongly imply Cross committed himself. He took custody of Megan afterward, by force rather than agreement, and brought her to the facility where he worked. Cross's daughter died on the peninsula regardless, killed in an attack by one of the mutated subjects that had escaped containment during the facility's breakdown. The exact sequence isn't laid out in a single account, since the recovered camcorder tapes and written notes present it out of order and occasionally in tension with each other. But the through line across the documentation is consistent. Megan's death broke something in a man who was already broken well before it happened. He was terminated from Sahara for what internal records describe as inappropriate use of company equipment, evidently connected to unauthorized experimentation with the same resurrection technology he'd once been paid to study responsibly. Alone on the peninsula after Sahara's collapse, still in possession of enough knowledge to operate what the facility left behind, Cross used the Power Obelisk to bring down Eric's plane in search of a living child to complete the sacrifice the Resurrection Obelisk still required. The one ingredient he no longer had legal access to through any ordinary means, coating himself in red paint for the same protective purpose the peninsula's other inhabitants seemed to recognize, Cross retrieved Timmy from the wreckage, in full view of Eric, and carried him underground. The obelisk worked. Timmy's sacrifice successfully revived Megan. It also did something Cross evidently hadn't accounted for, or had refused to consider. What came back wasn't his daughter, in any recognizable sense. It was the ritual finding a body that would take it, and Megan was reshaped as thoroughly as the peninsula's other mutated inhabitants were before Eric ever descended into the lab. Following a trail of blood and disturbance deeper into the facility, Eric eventually reaches the obelisk himself and finds Cross's body lying near it. crayons driven into his eyes, mouth, and neck with enough violence to suggest an act of rage. One of Megan's own drawings, recovered nearby among her scattered sketches, implies she's the one responsible, apparently mistaking her red-painted father for a monster rather than recognizing him at all. Nearby, Eric finds his own son. Timmy is already dead, laid out beside the very machine that took him, wired into a system that no longer has anything left to give. Eric's response isn't grief that stops him, drawn by instinct, or by the same desperate logic that presumably drove Cross to the same machine. Eric places the connective wires from the obelisk onto Timmy's body. The machine responds, prompting for a new specimen rather than reviving what's already been placed inside it. The ritual, whatever else it is, doesn't run backward. It only takes. Understanding this much, Eric leaves the chamber, in search of whoever or whatever the machine successfully brought back, since that's the only remaining lead toward understanding what it would take to reverse what's been done to his son. The trail leads Eric to a large room deep in the facility, decorated incongruously with a child's crayon drawings and a scattering of toys, at the center of which Megan sits, still recognizably a young girl on first glance, flying a small toy plane through the air in front of her. As Eric approaches, she crashes the toy deliberately and points directly at him. A gesture the game frames as clear recognition. She knows exactly how Eric came to be here, and, by implication, exactly what happened to the boy who was sacrificed for her. What follows isn't a conversation. Megan collapses into a seizure, and from it emerges a transformation into something built along the same lines as the peninsula's other mutated horrors. Clawed limbs and grotesque additional appendages replacing the child Eric was looking at moments before. Forcing into a fight he never wanted, Eric kills what Megan has become. The corpse that remains afterward reverts partially to her human appearance, offering no comfort, only confirmation of what the resurrection process actually does to whoever survives it. Eric carries Megan's body back to the obelisk, operating on the same desperate logic that presumably drove Cross to make his own attempt. If a life given to the machine brought her back, a life given back to the machine should be able to return the favor. The obelisk refuses. The documentation and the mechanism itself are consistent on this point, even though nothing in the story states it outright through dialogue. Whatever this ritual requires, it isn't simply a body. It specifically needs something living, which a corpse, however recently animated, no longer qualifies as. A keycard recovered from Megan's remains opens access to a second chamber deeper in the complex, housing the power obelisk itself, the same artifact Cross used to bring Eric's plane down in the first place. Reaching it puts the entire mechanism directly under Eric's control for the first time in the story. Whatever he does with it next is the last decision the peninsula gives him. From the control room housing the power obelisk, Eric is given the same choice Cross made once before. He can activate the beam again, deliberately bringing down a second passing aircraft, and use one of its living passengers as the sacrifice the resurrection obelisk still requires to bring Timmy back. Following through completes the ritual. Timmy is revived, and the two of them are eventually rescued from the peninsula and returned home. What follows isn't a clean recovery. Timmy continues to suffer seizures, tied to whatever the resurrection left inside him, the same kind that preceded Megan's transformation, and the story's final glimpse of him comes years later. An adult now, struggling with alcoholism and medication, sitting alone with a map of a different, unnamed island. Pinned among his notes, one he's designated Site 2, the ending offering no clear sense of whether that's a man moving on or one being pulled back. Alternatively, Eric can choose not to activate the beam, sparing whoever was flying overhead and shutting the mechanism down instead. Taking this path means leaving the facility without Timmy, walking back out through the caves to watch the very plane he could have brought down pass safely overhead, before resuming whatever survival remains for him on the peninsula. Eric burns a photograph of his son, a small, quiet act of closure. The game offers no dialogue to explain, and none is needed. Neither ending resolves cleanly, and the game doesn't try to make either one feel like uncomplicated victory. The revival ending gives Timmy back, alive, but carrying something the resurrection left in him regardless. And only at the cost of another family somewhere losing exactly what Eric was trying to get back. A trade the game never asked Eric or the player to feel good about. The shutdown ending leaves Timmy dead, and Eric alone, having chosen, at the cost of everything he came here for, not to repeat the same act that destroyed Cross and his daughter before him. Scattered throughout both playthroughs are the camcorder tapes and drawings that make up most of Sahara's remaining record. Evidence of children besides Timmy and Megan who passed through this facility's version of the resurrection process, none of whose outcomes are given any more closure than the two the player directly witnesses. The peninsula, and whatever the Ancient Ones originally built beneath it, doesn't offer resolution as a built-in feature. It only offers the same choice it apparently gave Cross once already, framed as though it were new, handed now to whoever's desperate enough to walk all the way down into the sinkhole to find it. If this one resonated, subscribe. New essays drop weekly, and you never know what's coming next. Share it with someone who'd get it, and leave a comment. I want to know which door this opened for you. Mystery Compendium. The archive is always open.